My parents sold my laptop and emptied my savings. Then they forced me to sign for my sister's apartment. So I left one note that destroyed their lie. I still remember the smell of cinnamon and pine that morning, the kind of scent that usually meant peace, laughter, and coffee mugs clinking in the kitchen. Instead, it became the smell of the day my family broke me. My name's Nathan. I'm 23, and I'd been saving for 2 years to finally get out of my parents' house. I had a decent remote tech job, a beat-up car, and a simple dream. Move into a small apartment, maybe adopt a cat, and live without walking on eggshells. But my parents, well, they've always had a different definition of family. To them, it meant sacrifice. My sacrifice. It started with my sister, Lily. She's 26, the golden child, and somehow the sun never stopped shining on her. She's the kind of person who could crash your car and make you apologize for not having better brakes. Growing up, everything revolved around her. Her ballet recital, her failed college attempts, her next big opportunity. I used to joke that my parents didn't need a family tree, they needed a spotlight. But deep down, I didn't really joke. I just accepted my role. The quiet, dependable one who never made trouble, never needed help, and never got any either. This Christmas morning, I woke up to the sound of their voices in the kitchen. Mom was humming carols off-key like always, and Dad's voice had that low, serious tone he used whenever he was about to discuss something important. I came downstairs in my usual lazy morning clothes, flannel pants, hoodie, socks half off my feet, expecting presents, maybe pancakes, the usual fake cheer. But when I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. Sitting at the kitchen table were my parents, both dressed like they were about to head to church, and there was a white envelope sitting right in front of them. "Morning," I said carefully. "What's this?" Dad gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, Nathan. We need to talk. Now." I'd had enough "we need to talk" moments in my life to know that nothing good ever followed that phrase. I sat down anyway, hands tucked between my knees. Mom reached across the table and patted my arm like she was about to break bad news gently, except her eyes were already darting to Dad for permission to speak. "Honey," she began, "your father and I had to make a hard decision." I frowned. "About what?" Dad cleared his throat. "About family priorities." Those words hung in the air like smoke. Before I could ask, he pushed the envelope toward me. I opened it, expecting maybe a card or a note. Instead, I found a printed bank statement, mine, and a receipt for my laptop, my brand new MacBook, the one I'd bought 3 months earlier for work. At first, I thought it was a mistake. "This is my account," I said, slowly flipping through the pages. "Why are there withdrawals? And what's this about my laptop?" Mom sighed as if I'd just asked something childish. "We sold it, sweetheart. You'll understand when you hear why." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because my brain didn't know what else to do. "You sold my laptop?" "You what?" "That's my work computer." Dad's expression didn't change. He just folded his hands. "Your sister's situation is serious, Nathan. She found a nice apartment downtown, perfect location, safe area, and it's close to her job. But she needed a down payment immediately. We had to act fast." It took me a second to process that. "So you just took my savings and sold my laptop without asking me?" Mom's voice sharpened. "Don't raise your voice. We didn't take it. We used it for something important. You'll get another laptop someday. But Lily needs stability now. She's starting her life." Starting her life. The phrase echoed in my head like a bad joke. I've been working 70-hour weeks freelancing, saving every bit I could, skipping vacations and dinners out. And they'd used my money for Lily's stability. Then Dad pulled another paper from his folder. "There's one more thing. The lease requires a guarantor. Since you're employed and your sister isn't yet, you'll need to sign here." He slid the document across the table. "If you don't, we can't help her." I stared at the paper. "So if I don't sign this, what? You'll just, what, kick me out?" He looked me dead in the eyes. "If you can't support family, maybe it's time you learn to be independent. You're old enough." There it was, the threat disguised as tough love. My stomach sank and a lump built in my throat. I could barely breathe. I wasn't even angry yet. I was just numb. Mom started to speak softer now, like she was trying to sweet-talk me into compliance. Nathan, please, don't be dramatic. It's Christmas. We all have to give a little. Your sister has been through so much this year. Yeah, so much. Like quitting her third job because the manager was too demanding, or blowing through her savings on designer bags she needed for confidence. I glanced at the tree behind them. Twinkling lights, fake gifts wrapped just for decoration, and suddenly the whole scene looked like a parody. Do you realize, I said slowly, that you stole from me? Dad's expression hardened. Watch your words. No, I said louder, now. You stole from me. You took my property, my money, and you're calling it love? Mom stood up, tears welling up instantly, her favorite defense mechanism. How dare you talk to your father like that? We've done everything for you. That line, every time. I could feel my pulse in my ears. I pushed the paper back toward them.
I'm not signing anything.
For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dad's chair scraped back. He stood up, towering over me, his voice low but sharp. Then you can find somewhere else to stay. You think you're a man? Act like one. I looked between them, Mom crying quietly, Dad seething, the Christmas lights flickering behind their heads. And I realized. Something clicked inside me.
This wasn't just about money. It was about control. It always had been.
I'll pack my things, I said. Mom gasped. Nathan, don't be ridiculous. I didn't answer. I just walked upstairs, heartbeat thudding like drums in my chest. Every step felt heavier. My room looked exactly the same. Bed unmade, laundry piled, little Christmas gift bag I prepared for them still sitting on my desk.
Inside it were 2 custom mugs, World's Best Mom and World's Best Dad.
I stared at them for a long time before quietly placing them back in the drawer. As I started packing, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something else, something colder. I wasn't going to argue anymore. I wasn't going to plead for fairness. They'd made their choice, and now I was going to make mine. I grabbed my suitcase laptop bag. Well, the empty case that used to hold my laptop and coat. Then I sat at my desk, opened a blank sheet of paper, and began to write. Just 1 page short, honest, final. By the time I left the note on the kitchen counter, the sun was starting to rise. I didn't look back when I closed the door behind me. What I didn't know then was that by the next morning, that single piece of paper would throw my entire family into chaos. My sister crying Mom, calling every relative she could, and Dad realizing too late that this time I wasn't bluffing. But before all that unfolded, before the phone calls and guilt trips and regret, there was that silence, that first beautiful silence of freedom, as I stepped into the cold Christmas air and finally, stopped being their scapegoat. And that's where everything started to unravel. I spent the night at an all-night diner near the bus station, staring at my reflection in the window, while snow kept drifting sideways outside. I didn't even have a plan, just a duffel bag and the kind of emptiness that hums in your chest when something you relied on breaks for good. My phone buzzed a few times, Mom's name flashing across the screen. But I couldn't bring myself to answer. I kept thinking about how calmly Dad had said those words. Maybe it's time you learn to be independent. He'd admit it as punishment, but sitting there with bad coffee and cheap pancakes, I realized he'd accidentally given me permission. The next morning, my old college friend Eric texted back. You can crash here for a bit, he wrote. Couch isn't great, but it's free. That was enough. I caught the first bus out, clutching my bag like it contained my entire life, because, really, it did. On the way there, I scrolled through my banking app again, hoping maybe there had been some mistake. The numbers didn't lie. My savings account had been drained to almost zero. Every deposit I'd made over the last 2 years was gone. I'd worked freelance tech support, taken night shifts debugging code for startups that didn't even exist anymore. I'd eaten instant noodles for weeks just to reach that number. Now, it was all gone, replaced by a single withdrawal labeled Transfer Family Assistance. That label made my stomach turn. Eric's apartment was small, barely 1 bedroom, but it was quiet, and that quiet felt like oxygen. He didn't ask too many questions, just tossed me a blanket, muttered something about parents being complicated, and went back to gaming. I was grateful for that. I needed silence more than sympathy.
A few days passed before I decided to check in with my family. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stand the suspense. I texted Mom first. "I'm safe. Please don't worry." She replied almost instantly. "Where are you? Your father is furious. Come home. We can talk." I didn't respond. An hour later, another message. "You're acting childish, Nathan. Lily's crying. She didn't ask for this." That part stung more than I expected. I'd known Lily wasn't exactly innocent, but I didn't think she'd be crying over me leaving. Maybe guilt. I wanted to believe that until the next text came in. It was from her. "You made Mom cry on Christmas. You know that. Over some money. Grow up, Nate. You'll get more." I needed that down payment. No apology, just entitlement. Pure and simple. I started typing a reply, but stopped. What was the point? I deleted the draft, put my phone face down, and decided then that silence would be my weapon. Over the next week, Mom sent more messages. Pictures of the family dinner table of Lily's new apartment with the caption, "See what your help made possible?" Each one felt like salt in a wound. Then Dad joined in with his own brand of guilt tripping. "You think you can just walk away? Family isn't a choice." I didn't reply to any of it, but I kept every message. I didn't know why yet, but something in me said to hold on to proof. Then one evening, Eric came home waving his phone. "Dude, check this out," he said, half laughing. "Your sister just posted an Instagram story. New apartment tour. Guess who she tagged?" My heart sank before he even showed me. There it was, a perfectly lit video of Lily posing in her brand new living room. Fake plants and designer couch behind her, captioned, "Finally moved into my dream place. Couldn't have done it without my amazing parents. Hashtag family first." Family first. I could feel the heat rise behind my eyes. The comments were worse. Her friends were congratulating her. Mom had commented 3 heart emojis, and Dad had written, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. You deserve it." No mention of the laptop, no mention of the savings, no mention of me. That was the first night I really let myself get angry. Not loud angry, just that deep, quiet kind, where your chest tightens and your brain starts connecting dots you've been ignoring for years. This wasn't the first time they'd chosen Lily over me. This was just the biggest example. I thought back to when I was 15, saving for a gaming PC. I'd mowed lawns all summer, stacked every dollar in a jar. The week I was ready to buy it, Mom came into my room teary-eyed, saying Lily's dance recital costumes cost more than expected. I ended up handing her the jar. I never saw that money again. Or when I was 17 and got accepted into a coding camp, Dad promised to help me pay the registration fee. Then, at the last minute, he told me the family car needed urgent repairs after Lily accidentally hit a pole. Guess who paid that bill? Every memory started bleeding into the next. All those little sacrifices I'd made, the times I'd swallowed resentment, because that's what good sons do. Suddenly, I realized I wasn't angry about this one Christmas. I was angry about a lifetime of being disposable. The next day, Mom called. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. When I answered, her voice was coated in that sugary concern I'd grown up with. "Nathan, sweetheart, we're worried sick." "Why are you punishing us like this?" I laughed under my breath. "Punishing you? You sold my laptop." "You're overreacting," she said quickly. "It was just a temporary solution. Your father's already looking into replacing it when things settle down. You know Lily's situation was urgent." "Mom," I interrupted, "do you even hear yourself? You took my savings without asking. That's not a temporary solution. That's theft." Her tone shifted immediately from pleading to sharp. "Don't you dare accuse us of that. We've supported you your entire life. You're acting ungrateful." There it was again, the script. Every argument always circled back to how much I owed them. I could feel my jaw clench. "I think we're done here," I said quietly, and hung up. That night, I started applying for new jobs, better ones, out of town. I needed distance. I didn't even tell Eric, but something inside me was already plotting quietly. Not revenge, not yet. Just awareness, a sense that if they wanted to play power games, I could too.
A week later, I got a notification from my bank again. This time, it wasn't a withdrawal. It was a credit check alert. Someone had tried to open a new credit card in my name. My stomach dropped. I called the bank immediately, and they confirmed it. The application had my address on it, my parents' house. I didn't even need to ask who did it. I just sat there, staring at the wall. They hadn't just taken my money. They were trying to use my name. I called home that night, and Dad answered. "We told you not to make this harder than it needs to be," he said before I could even speak. "What's going on with the credit card application?" I asked flatly. A pause, then a sigh. "Your sister needed to build credit for the apartment. We thought it'd be easier if he used my name." I cut in without asking. He didn't like that tone. "Watch how you talk to me. Son, we're doing what's best for this family." I laughed bitterly. "No, you're doing what's best for Lily." He started to raise his voice, but I hung up before he could finish. My hands were shaking again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was a slow-rising certainty that I couldn't let this keep happening. Over the next few days, I began quietly gathering everything. Emails, bank statements, text messages, screenshots of my sister's posts bragging about her new start. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it, but I knew I needed proof. For once, I was going to be the one holding the cards. Meanwhile, Mom kept calling. First to beg, then to guilt, then to accuse. "You've embarrassed this family," she said in one voicemail. "Your sister's friends are asking questions. Why are you doing this to us?" I didn't respond, but inside, something colder was forming. That same night, I overheard Eric telling his girlfriend about me. "He's too nice," he said. "His family treats him like a doormat." He wasn't wrong, but I wasn't going to be that person anymore. A few days later, Lily texted me out of the blue. "Hey, can you come by the new place? Mom said you left something important at home. Also, I need your help with some paperwork." My first instinct was to ignore her, but curiosity got the better of me. "What paperwork?" I replied. She sent a picture, a lease amendment with my name typed neatly next to hers. Landlord said, "It's just a formality. Can you sign this today?" I stared at the screen for a long time, the same heat rising in my chest as that morning on Christmas. It wasn't a formality. It was another trap. I didn't reply. Instead, I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the street below. Snow had started falling again, soft and slow, blanketing everything in silence. Somewhere between the sound of the city and my own heartbeat, I made a decision. This wasn't going to end with me running anymore. They'd taken my savings, my laptop tried to use my name, and still expected my obedience. They thought silence meant surrender, but I wasn't the quiet, dependable son anymore. I was done being their safety net, and the next time they tried to use me, they were going to regret it. What I didn't realize yet was that their next move would push everything past the point of no return, and that when it came, it would involve something far worse than stolen money. It would be personal. It would be betrayal, pure and deliberate, and it was coming sooner than I thought. 2 weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number while I was at work. Normally I let it go to voicemail, but something in me, some instinct sharpened by all the recent chaos, made me answer. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice low. "Is this Nathan Ross?" a woman asked, brisk and professional. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Denise from Greenhill Auto Financing. We're just confirming your recent loan application for the 2017 Audi A4. My breath caught. "What loan?" She hesitated. "The application was submitted under your name and social security number yesterday. I just need to verify a few details before approval." The rest of her sentence faded into static in my mind. I gripped my phone tighter, every muscle in my jaw locking. I hadn't applied for any car loan. I didn't even have a car anymore. Mine had broken down months ago, and I'd been taking the bus since. I swallowed hard. "Can you tell me the address listed on the application?" "Sure. One moment," she said, tapping keys in the background. "It's listed as 92 Brookview Lane, my parents' house." I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there for a full minute, staring at nothing. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I felt dizzy, like I just stepped into a world where up and down no longer existed. They'd done it again. They'd used my identity, this time for a car loan. I stepped outside into the cold, trying to breathe.
The air burned my lungs, but it helped keep me from shaking apart. I called the dealership listed on the loan paperwork, Green Hill Motors, and asked for details. The manager, a guy named Rick, answered.
Yeah, the Audi A4, right? Real nice car. You already picked it up yesterday. I froze. Picked it up? Who? I heard him shuffle papers. Let's see, Lily Ross. You two must be related, huh? She said her brother was helping her out with the paperwork. I ended the call before my voice could give out.
My sister, she'd actually done it. I stood there for a long time in the parking lot, phone still in my hand, the winter wind biting at my face. Then I laughed, quiet, breathless, almost hysterical. Of course she had. Of course she'd take it one step further. When I got back to Eric's apartment, he took one look at me and said, "Dude, you look like you've seen a ghost."
I think my sister just bought a car, I said, sitting down heavily on the couch. In my name, he blinked. You're kidding. I showed him the call log, the dealership info, the loan confirmation. He whistled low. That's next level. I couldn't even find words. I felt something between anger and heartbreak, like the last thread of family connection had just snapped. That night, I called Mom. No more texts, no more ignoring. I wanted to hear her voice when I said it. She picked up on the second ring, her tone instantly defensive. Nathan, I was hoping you'd finally call. You've been avoiding us long enough. Did Lily buy a car? I asked. A pause. Just long enough to confirm everything. Well, she said slowly, your sister needed reliable transportation for work. She's been borrowing our car constantly. And your father, don't I interrupted. Don't you dare tell me this is about helping her. She used my name, my credit, my identity. You're overreacting again, she said, her voice sharpening. It's just paperwork. She'll make the payments. You'll barely notice. Barely notice? I nearly shouted. You people have stolen my savings, my laptop, and now my credit score. Watch your tone, she snapped, switching to her scolding voice. We raised you better than this. Family helps each other. You're acting selfish. I laughed, but it came out hollow. No, Mom. Family doesn't help themselves to whatever they want and call it love. Before she could reply, I hung up. My hands were trembling again, that familiar storm building behind my ribs. I opened my laptop, the cheap used one I'd bought since leaving, and started typing an email to Green Hill Motors, attaching copies of my ID and a statement declaring the loan fraudulent. Then I filed a police report for identity theft. It felt surreal typing "suspect immediate family member." For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. But the betrayal didn't stop there. A few days later, I got a message from an old neighbor, Mrs. Holbrook. She was like the unofficial neighborhood spy, always peering through curtains and gossiping, but harmless enough. Hey, sweetie, she wrote. I saw your folks and sister out front yesterday. Looked like a celebration. Lily got a new car and your dad was showing everyone your gift. So generous of you. My blood ran cold. I called her immediately. What did he say? Oh, he was bragging, she said, chuckling. Told the neighbors his son was doing so well now. He bought his sister a car as a surprise. Said, it's nice to see you giving back to the family after they supported you all these years. My throat went dry. He said that word for word. Dear. When I hung up, something inside me broke for real. Not the fragile hurt kind of break. No, this one was quiet, deliberate, irreversible, like glass being crushed underfoot. They'd turned my theft into a story of generosity. They'd humiliated me and called it pride. That weekend, I went home. I didn't warn them, I didn't text or call. I just showed up, standing on that same porch where I'd once left my farewell note. The driveway gleamed with a silver Audi, parked neatly beside Dad's old truck. My stomach twisted. I knocked once. Mom opened the door, startled. Nathan! Oh my goodness! Honey, you came! She looked like she wanted to hug me, but I stepped back. Where's Lily? I asked. She frowned. She's inside. What? Before she could stop me, I walked in. The living room was spotless, the same holiday decorations still up. Lily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, legs crossed. When she saw me, she smirked like nothing had happened. Well, look who decided to show up. I didn't speak. I just looked at her. How's the car? I asked finally. She blinked. Excuse me? The Audi, I said evenly. The one you bought in my name. Her smile faltered. I don't know what you're talking about. Mom stepped in quickly. Nathan, please. Let's not do this right now. No, I said louder. Now. Let's do exactly this. Dad came out of his office, irritation already in his eyes. What's this about now? You know what it's about, I said. You're parading that car around the neighborhood like I bought it for her. Do you think I'm stupid? His voice dropped to that familiar warning growl. Lower your tone. No, I said again. Not this time. You've stolen from me. You've lied about me. You've turned me into your scapegoat for years. I'm done pretending this is normal. Lily scoffed, crossing her arms. Oh, come on, it's just a car. You act like we took your soul or something. I turned to her, my voice quiet but steady. You did, actually. You took everything that made me trust you. For a moment, no one said anything. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Then Dad stepped forward. You've got a lot of nerve coming here accusing your family. We did everything for you. Roof over your head, food on your plate, and this is how you repay us? By dragging us through the mud? I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I'd spent my whole life trying to please. And for the first time, I didn't see authority. I saw a bully hiding behind the word father. I took a deep breath. You can keep the car, I said finally. But the story is going to change. Everyone's going to know the truth. Mom gasped. Nathan, don't you dare. But I was already heading for the door. I didn't yell. I didn't slam it. I just walked out, leaving their stunned faces behind. Outside, the cold air hit me like a reset button. My heart was hammering, but I felt lighter. They had crossed the final line, and for once, I wasn't powerless. They thought I'd disappear quietly again, but this time, I had proof. I had every message, every bank statement, every lie documented. And before long, the entire world was going to see who they really were. I didn't know it yet, but the next step, my quiet plan for payback, was going to explode in ways none of us could have predicted. Because when I finally decided to get even, I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to make sure they never used mine again. When everything finally blew up, it didn't happen in a single cinematic moment. It happened in tiny, grinding ways that wore me down until I couldn't hide the cracks anymore. The bank called about late payments on the fraudulent car loan. The credit card company sent polite but urgent letters threatening collections if the account holder didn't respond. My email was full of unfamiliar alerts, loan inquiries, verification attempts, password reset emails for accounts I hadn't opened. I spent nights hunched over my laptop at Eric's place, feeling like I was trying to hold a house together with duct tape and elbow grease. Every new notification was another nail in the coffin of whatever normal life I thought I had. Rock bottom wasn't dramatic. It was a stack of bills I couldn't pay because accounts had been frozen pending fraud investigations. It was an angry voicemail from a client I'd helped for years, who assumed I'd disappeared. And it was the slow, humiliating realization that my parents had weaponized my own identity to prop up their favorite child. I remember sitting on the curb outside a 24-hour convenience store, cradling a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold, and thinking for the first time in my life that maybe I had no one left. That's the raw thing about hitting bottom. It clarifies. Stripped of illusions, there's a brutal sort of honesty that creeps in. The denial fades fast when creditors call and your name is on documents you never signed. The pity you hoped would soften your family's heart evaporates when your mother tells friends at the neighborhood barbecue that you went off the rails. You start to see people for what they are, and you start to see yourself as something other than someone to be used. The first week after confronting them, I lived off Ken's soup, Eric's goodwill, and a tiny freelance gig I could manage between phone calls to fraud departments and meetings at the police station. Filing the reports felt both small and monumental. I printed bank statements, screenshots of Lily's posts, voicemail transcripts, the dealership paperwork, and the credit application showing my social security number. The police clerk looked at me with tired eyes and stamped the report with a kind of bureaucratic finality. It didn't solve anything overnight, but at least it was a start.
I filed disputes with the banks, placed fraud alerts, and called the major credit bureaus to freeze my accounts. Each call felt like sawing through a binding rope. Progress, but slow and exhausting. Professionally, things were a mess. A couple of clients panicked, assuming I'd vanish. Others cheered me on. I lost one contract that had been a steady income, and for a week, my stomach lived in my throat as my savings. What little remained dwindled. I slept poorly. I replayed every past favor I'd done for them, every excuse I'd swallowed. And it felt like a lifetime of tiny betrayals had added up to this avalanche. But human beings are strange creatures. Push them into a corner and some of them sharpen into something new. I had always been resilient in an unassuming way. Now, resilience got a facelift. Somewhere between late-night calls to creditors and a day job helping patch code for a small startup, a slow plan started to take shape in the corners of my brain. It began as survival. Get a steady job, fix credit, clear my name, but then changed into something more precise and dangerous. Get strong enough that they couldn't touch me again. Not out of vengeance at first, but out of self-preservation. Once you've been victimized by the people who are supposed to protect you, self-preservation starts to taste like a moral imperative. The turning point was subtle. It happened when I applied for a remote job through a temp agency and, to my surprise, got an interview. The job wasn't glamorous data migration for a mid-sized company, but it paid reliably and, crucially, it allowed me to work from anywhere. I aced the interview because I was honest about my situation and framed it as curiosity and grit rather than weakness. The hiring manager liked that I was pragmatic. Within a month, I had regular paychecks again. I started to breathe. With a steady income, things stopped feeling like a free fall. I rented a tiny studio on the edge of town. Small, but mine paid the security deposit in cash and picked up a cheap but decent laptop. I slept on a mattress on the floor for a few weeks because furniture was a luxury I couldn't afford yet. But the place was quiet, and that quiet was its own kind of luxury. I set up 2 email accounts, one for work, one for everything else. I opened a new bank account under the watchful eye of a fraud prevention specialist, who walked me through extra protections. I learned painfully and thoroughly how to neuter someone else's access to your life. While I was building the scaffolding for a new life, something else happened that surprised me. People started to notice, and not in the way my parents did, not with applause or showy sympathy, but with practical help. Denise from Greenhill Auto Financing. Ironically, the same woman who'd called me about the fraudulent loan turned out to be a reasonable person when I had 5 minutes to explain what happened. She arranged for the dealership to freeze any collections while the fraud department completed its investigation. Eric's girlfriend Anna, who I barely knew at first, introduced me to a friend who worked at a nonprofit that helped victims of identity theft. They connected me with a paralegal who offered to draft letters and guide me through disputes for a fraction of what a private attorney would cost. Maybe the most critical thing was the new respect I got from myself. For the first time, I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I answered phone calls. I chased down paperwork. I learned to speak to collections agents like a trained negotiator, calm, methodical, and unwilling to be railroaded. It was boring work. It was also the kind of practical heroism that doesn't make for dramatic movies, but builds character. Month by month, my credit report stopped looking like a crime scene and started to look like someone who was recovering. Work also began to open doors I hadn't expected. The data migration job led to a contract with a startup that needed a back-end developer. I taught myself Python and a framework in the evenings after work. My teacher was necessity. My mentor was documentation on obscure forums. Within 6 months, I was doing freelance back-end work that paid twice what the temp gig did. I spent nights learning, weekends building a portfolio, and slowly converting that momentum into stability. Money, for the first time in a long while, stopped being a ticking bomb and became a tool I could use deliberately. There was an emotional rise, too. Small victories, paying off the last of the fraudulent charges, getting a letter from the lender that cleared my name, built a ladder out of the hole. I reconnected with people who didn't judge me for being needy or broke. I stopped measuring my self-worth by my parents' approval. Instead, I started measuring it by little tangible things: the balance in my bank account, the number of interviews I'd done,
the clients who asked for my help again because I'd done good work. And yet, the past lingered. I couldn't forget how Lily had smiled at me the day she sat on our couch and denied everything. I couldn't stop replaying the image of Dad bragging about a car I had never bought. Those moments lodged inside me like spines, painful but sharpened. They taught me that power could be taken in small, everyday ways, but they also taught me that power could be rebuilt in small, patient steps. I started putting systems in place. I archived every message screenshot and statement in multiple places. I set up encrypted backups. I documented timelines and dates like a detective building a case. It wasn't dramatic. Most nights it was tedious, clicking through old messages, saving files, labeling them properly. But slowly, a dossier formed, a clean, professional folder that laid out everything they had done. Withdrawals, loan documents, texts, posts, and the lie that my generosity had funded Lily's life. I named the folder with something mundane, personal records, and for the first time, I felt like a grown-up who could manage adult-sized problems. Opportunity also arrived in the shape of human mentorship. One of my new clients, Mara, was a director at a small tech firm, and over a late-night call about a stubborn API bug, she asked me about my plans. I told her, without thinking, about the identity theft and the mess with my family. She listened, really listened, and then did something I still can't fully explain. She offered to help. Not with money, but with work. I need a reliable back-end dev to take on more responsibility. She said, "Prove you're competent and I'll make room for you." It was the kind of offer that felt like sunlight through winter glass. I worked like a man with something to prove, because I did. Within a year, I had steady clients, a modest emergency fund, and a new sense of agency. I paid off the last of the fraudulent marks, and the cars and leases that had been opened in my name were either closed or reassigned after banks acknowledged the fraud. I changed my phone number, set up a P.O. box, and moved again. This time into a small but bright apartment that felt like a promise. I bought a cheap set of dishes, a mattress with a real frame, and a lamp I liked. Those are minor details, but they matter when you're building a life from the ground up. They are the scaffolding of dignity. As my life improved, so did my perspective. I wasn't solely motivated by revenge anymore. I wanted security, respect, and the ability to say no without fearing homelessness or shame. But the ember of anger still burned. That ember was practical now, not spiteful. I wanted to ensure my parents could never weaponize me again. I wanted their story about the generous son who gave everything to a sister to be replaced with facts. I wanted them to face the reality that family didn't give them carte blanche to destroy someone else's life. So I made a plan, quiet and methodical. Not a grandiose public meltdown or an explosive social media post. Nothing theatrical. I wanted leverage, hard, introvertible leverage, that would protect me and force accountability if they ever tried anything like this again. I continued to document, to solidify every piece of evidence, and to quietly consult with the paralegal connected to that nonprofit. I learned my legal options: identity theft charges, civil claims, official complaints to financial institutions. I started mapping the timeline of every transgression, what they did and when, so that, if the day came, I could present an airtight case. And while I was doing all of that, life, annoyingly, wonderfully, kept moving forward. I made friends who were not family, people who became a community in the most ordinary ways. Dinner invites, a neighbor who watered my plants when I was away, a coworker who texted memes that made me laugh until I cried. I adopted a tabby from the shelter because I wanted the companionship, and because naming something and feeding it felt like a tiny, defiant reclaiming of joy. But beneath all the small wins, that ember of what they took remained. It had shifted shape, less about immediate retaliation, more about ensuring their ability to manipulate and erase me was gone. I still hadn't confronted them publicly. I still hadn't served any grand legal notices. Part of me wanted to wait until I had the absolute upper hand. Another part of me wanted the satisfaction of seeing their faces when their lies unraveled. The plan was patient, and patience suited me now. What I did next was quiet and deliberate. I began to let the right people know the truth in neutral, controlled ways. An email to the dealership with a clear summary of the fraud. A polite letter to the neighborhood gossip who'd been spreading my parents' version of events.
And a few carefully worded messages to extended family members who had already been looped in by Mom's frantic calls.
I didn't rant. I didn't beg. I just told facts and attached documents. The goal wasn't to shame. It was to correct the narrative and protect myself in case of future attempts. Each time I hit send, I felt a temperature drop in my chest. It was like closing a wound. And then, when I thought I was finally settling into this new life, stronger, clearer, and quietly dangerous,
Something unexpected landed in my inbox. A short curtail from Dad. The subject line was as neutral as a judge's gavel. We need to talk. I stared at it for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then withdrew. The dossier sat on my external drive, encrypted and ready. The list of legal options was updated. I was not the frightened kid who slept in the back of a bus station anymore. I didn't open the email right away. Instead, I made coffee, fed the cat, and walked to my window to watch the city unfold. The world was ordinary. People hurrying to work, buses idling, a dog walker who always insisted on letting the beagle sniff every lamppost. Ordinary felt like a miracle after the last year. I had rebuilt a life out of shards and paper clips. I had, in a way, become my own guarantor. And yet, the email pulsed like a small, inevitable drumbeat in the back of my mind. Whatever came next would require a choice. Walk away completely and leave them to their lies, or engage and force accountability. I had grown into someone who understood my own value. I knew I could survive alone, but I also knew that some things aren't about survival. They're about recording, about refusing to be erased. So I sat down and typed a single, careful sentence. No anger, no pleading, no bluster. When and where I wrote. Then hit send. They replied with a time and a place. Sunday 2 days from now at the diner where I'd slept my first night away from home. I closed my laptop and let out a breath that felt more like a decision than a relief. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't vengeful. Yet. I was ready. I had strength I hadn't known I had, and I had a plan that would not rely on emotion, but on fact. The rise had been slow, boring, and magnificent in its steadiness. The rock bottom had taught me to build from rubble. What came after, I knew would be the test of whether that new structure could withstand more than just weather. I slept poorly that night, not from fear, but from anticipation. The next day carried the weight of possibilities. I didn't know exactly how the confrontation would go. I didn't know whether doors would slam or whether I'd finally get the apology I didn't want. I only knew that I would not be the person on the receiving end of their manipulation anymore. Sunday arrived like any other day, ordinary cold and edged with the smell of frying onions from the diner. I tied my shoes, slowly checked the dossier one last time, and walked out the door with the quiet conviction of someone who had rebuilt themselves brick by brick. I was ready to face them. When Sunday came, the diner smelled like burnt coffee and orange peel. Same place where I'd slept the first night I left home, only now I sat at a corner booth with a folder that felt heavier than it looked. The leather cover hid printouts, emails, bank statements, dealership forms, and voicemail transcripts. I'd labeled everything and organized it like an evidence box. Timeline on top, then financial records, then text threads, then the social proof. Lily's posts, Mom's comments, Dad's bragging to Mrs. Holbrook. It felt clinical and boring and exactly what I needed. I wasn't going to shout or collapse into tears. I was going to be precise. They came in together, Dad first, shoulder straight like he was walking into a courtroom. Mom trailing, looking like she'd applied guilt like a layer of makeup. And Lily last, her clicking, bright and smug. I watched them sit down as if I'd never known them at all, cataloging their faces the way I'd catalog documents. Dad didn't look surprised to see me. He looked annoyed, the way predators look when their prey finally resists. Mom tried the sweet voice first. "Nathan, honey, we're so glad you came. Sit down." "I'm fine standing," I said. My voice was steady. I pushed the folder toward the center of the table. I thought I'd bring receipts. Dad's jaw tightened. "What receipts?" "The one showing you sold my laptop and emptied my savings."
The loan application for the Audi with my social security number. The dealership paperwork showing Lily picked up the car yesterday.
The credit application for the apartment. The messages where you told the neighborhood I bought Lily a car. I let the words land. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Lily rolled her eyes. This is ridiculous. You're embarrassing everyone. Am I? I asked. Because here's a copy of the transfer labeled Family Assistance. Here's the receipt for the MacBook sold to a pawn shop 24 hours before you posted the apartment tour.
Here's the loan application with my signature. Spoofed. But if you thought anyone wouldn't notice the address and pattern, you were wrong. And here's the email I sent to Greenhill Motors last week contesting the loan. Denise replied and put a temporary hold on collections until the fraud team finished their review. I tapped the folder like a judge tapping a gavel. Everything's neat and documented. Mom's face went a shade paler. That had been my goal. No theatrics, just facts. Dad's posture shifted from angry to defensive. This is lealess, he said. You can't just come in here and watch me, I said softly. Then I did something I hadn't planned entirely, but knew would be effective. I slid my phone across the table and opened a group email I'd started an hour before they arrived. On the two-line were people who mattered. The landlord's office, the dealership manager, Rick, Mrs. Holbrook, a handful of neighborhood association members, and 2 extended family group. Chad's mom had CC'd into dozens of threads over the holidays. The subject line read, Important fraudulent activity involving Ross family. Facts attached. I had sent. For a moment, the diner noise swallowed the world. Then, phones buzzed around the table. Mom's hand covered her mouth. Lily flinched like she'd been slapped. Dad's eyes bore into me in a way that looked less like anger now and more like fear. I didn't gloat. I simply let them watch their narrative evaporate. Within 10 minutes, I started getting replies. Rick from Greenhill wrote, We've received documentation and have repossessed vehicle pending fraud investigation. Please do not contact Miss Ross regarding the vehicle. The landlord replied, We need to speak off record. Please provide proof of identity theft regarding the guarantor documents. Mrs. Holbrook sent a curt message. I'm very sorry. Please accept my apologies. I had no idea. And a cousin I barely knew wrote, This changes everything. I'll call Mom and Dad later. Dad's mouth opened and closed like he'd lost the script. You'll regret this, he said. But there was no venom left, only the hollow echo of someone realizing they'd miscalculated. Mom began to cry, not the practice tears she'd weaponized before, but quiet, sincere-sounding fear. Lily stood up, her face flushing a terrible shade, and for the first time that year, I saw panic in her eyes. You made us look like criminals, she hissed. We were helping you. You made yourself look like a criminal, I answered. You used my identity. You sold my things and called it a gift. You bragged about it. Now people who matter are listening to facts instead of stories. The payoff wasn't an explosion. It was a clean, clinical unraveling. Within the hour, the dealership's repossession was public knowledge in our little cul-de-sac, and the landlord called Dad to say the lease was on hold until they could verify the guarantor's signature. Dad tried to call Rick and got voicemail. He tried to corner the landlord in person and was politely turned away. His face, usually so carefully composed, collapsed into confusion. By late afternoon, my inbox was full of new allies. Denise from Greenhill called to apologize, her voice earnest, the kind of corporate sympathy that actually accomplished things. The nonprofit paralegals sent next steps, formal affidavit letters to the credit bureaus, a plan for civil claims if banks refused to rectify the damage. Mara, who'd become an unexpected mentor, messaged, You did the right thing. If you want, I can put you on a project that needs a lead dev. It pays well and will cover legal hours as a contingency. I almost cried reading that, not because of the money, because for the first time I felt like someone had my back without wanting anything from me in return. Neighbors who had once nodded at Dad's generosity started giving me sympathetic looks. A few offered to testify about Dad's bragging at any hearing. The cousin who'd been nursing gossip sent a private message. I'm so sorry. If you need anything, tell me the truth. I'll stand with you. That last one mattered more than I expected. It meant the story my parents had been spinning that I'd suddenly become the villain was fracturing. People were choosing transparency over family mythology. Walking back to Eric's that night, the winter air felt like clarity. I wasn't celebrating destruction. I was watching consequences align with actions.
That was the kind of satisfaction that wasn't loud. It was sharp and cold and entirely deserved. The revenge had been quiet, precise, not petty. It relied on law, process, and people who cared about the truth more than they cared about appearances. Still, karma didn't hand me the final victory that night. There were loose ends. Lily's reputation in tatters, but still denials on social media. Mom calling aunties who didn't yet believe. Dad pacing the house like a trapped animal. Frantic, not because of guilt, but because he'd lost control. I expected that. Power stripped from the entitled doesn't vanish, it shifts. My goal had never been to humiliate for the joy of it. It was to neutralize their ability to weaponize me again. The repossession, the frozen lease, the bank's fraud flags, that was progress. But there was one consequence I hadn't counted on. Community sympathy for my parents didn't evaporate overnight. A few neighbors still whispered that family was complicated, and maybe I'd overreacted. Some of Lily's friends rallied to her side, convinced this was a misunderstanding. The courts moved slowly. The banks take time. The legal system doesn't hand out quick moral judgments. I knew there would be a long slog if they chose to fight it. That night, Dad left a voicemail, short-clipped. Call me. No apology, no explanation. But when I called back, he didn't pick up. I left a message instead. Not pleading, not threatening. We'll discuss this in court if we must. Until then, leave me out of your life. Then I uploaded a copy of the police report to my cloud and emailed the paralegal. Proceed when you can. Lily texted me at 2 a.m., panic through every word. Nate, please. I didn't know it was going to go this far. Mom's crying. Dad says this is your fault. I'm scared. I didn't respond right away. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the folder on my laptop. The same folder that had felt so heavy that morning. Revenge had been executed. Calm, intelligent, and with allies that mattered. The Audi gone. The lease frozen. Their stories cracking. People who had once laughed when my name came up were suddenly reading documents instead of listening to spin. But the payoff also showed me a reality I hadn't wanted to admit. Breaking their control meant they would fight back in other ways, less visible, but maybe more insidious. They might dig into old secrets. They might try to paint me as unstable, or they might weaponize sympathy to rally relatives who hadn't yet seen the documents. I wasn't naive. Power vacuums attract other games, so I prepared for the next phase. I updated my evidence folder with the new emails and the dealership's confirmation. I texted Denise to thank her and asked if she could connect me with the fraud department manager. I replied to Mara's offer and accepted the lead role. Steady income would mean I could hire counsel without worrying about immediate ruin. I messaged the cousin and asked if she'd be willing to join a family meeting, public mediated and with an independent witness. The idea wasn't to humiliate more. It was to make sure there was a record, a neutral space where truth mattered. Around dawn, as the city yawned awake, Dad called again. This time I answered. His voice was small, stripped of the performance I'd known all my life. "We need to talk," he said simply. No threats, no theatrics, just a tired man's sentence. I closed my eyes and thought of everything I'd lost and everything I'd built. I thought of the tiny cat lazy in the window of the apartment lamp I liked of the clients who trusted me, and of Mara's message that had felt like a hand reaching into the dark. I also thought of the way Dad had looked when the emails started to buzz, like a puppet whose strings someone else had cut. "Okay," I said at last. "We'll talk with a mediator and with lawyers." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, softer than I'd ever heard him, Dad said, "I don't want this to go to court." "Neither do I," I said. "But I'm not going back to being what you made me. Not ever." He didn't respond. I could hear the phone clamp against his ear as he thought. I ended the call and looked at the dawn light spilling across my desk. The revenge had worked, smart, calm, and satisfying. But it hadn't been the end. It was a beginning. In the quiet after, I realized the most important victory wasn't the Audi or the frozen lease. It was that I had found people who would stand by facts instead of family stories, that I could support myself,
and that I had the courage to stop being erased.
I also understood the fragile truth of power. It shifts, it corrodes, and it demands vigilance. I had removed their ability to loot me casually. Now, I had to make sure they couldn't rewrite history or wreck my future with sly, sustained sabotage. Sunday's victory had changed the playing field. I felt steadier, smarter, and oddly cold. And I knew the real battle was only just beginning. The next moves would be less about exposing and more about protecting. But tonight, for the first time in years, I slept without waking in a panic. And somewhere in the house, they still called our family. Dad sat in the dim living room, and for the first time in a long time, wondered which of his choices he'd be forced to explain in public. I didn't know what he'd decide next. I only knew I wasn't going to be the passive option in his life story any longer. The next chapter would require patience, law, and people who understood how to hold power accountable. I closed my laptop and let the silence stretch. The revenge had been tidy and decisive. The war was different. It would be longer, and it would demand everything I'd quietly rebuilt. But for the first time, I felt like I had the map. Fallout came slower than the revenge itself. It didn't burst into flames. It spread like frost over everything they'd built on lies. One day, one call, one silence at a time. The first cracks appeared the week after that diner meeting. The dealership formally repossessed the Audi, broad daylight tow truck, and all in front of the neighbors who'd once believed my parents' generous son story. The driver didn't bother with discretion. He just backed into the driveway, winch squealing, and pulled the car up with all the indifference of someone doing his 10th job that day. Dad came outside shouting about mistakes and misunderstandings, but Rick himself was there this time, clipboard in hand, cool and polite. "Sir," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "we've confirmed identity fraud tied to this purchase. The account holder, your son, has provided full documentation. Until this investigation concludes, the vehicle is company property." The neighbors stopped pretending to rake leaves and watch from their windows. Lily came running out barefoot, screaming that this was harassment, but the driver ignored her, securing the car with metal chains that clinked like punctuation. When the truck rolled away, the silence left behind was heavy and strange. I wasn't there to see it, but Mrs. Holbrook recorded the entire thing from her porch camera and sent it to me with one sentence: "You were right." A week later, Dad's company HR department called him in for routine compliance questions. Apparently, word of the fraud had reached one of their financial partners, and because he'd been listed as a co-signer on certain documents, he had to explain himself. His boss, a man I remembered from childhood barbecues, wasn't cruel, just disappointed. It didn't help that my father's pride had always been his reputation for integrity. When he came home that day, according to a message Aunt Karen sent me later, he looked pale and hollow. For the first time in decades, he didn't eat dinner at the head of the table. Mom, meanwhile, found her social circle evaporating. The same neighbors who used to fawn over her home decor posts stopped commenting. The church ladies who once adored her devoted mother persona started quietly keeping their distance. She tried to host her annual neighborhood brunch, but only 2 people showed up, both of them awkward and leaving early. She texted me 3 times that week, each message shorter than the last. "Please, Nathan, can we fix this? You've ruined everything. I just wanted our family to stay together." I didn't answer any of them. I'd learned silence could be its own verdict. Lily, though, she spiraled fastest. The apartment lease collapsed once the landlord confirmed the guarantor signature was fake. They gave her 30 days to vacate. The down payment she'd made with my stolen money had been seized as evidence in the fraud case. The friend she bragged to on social media ghosted her overnight when the screenshot circulated showing her lies. Someone even left a comment on her last post. "Guess your brother didn't buy you that car after all." She deleted her Instagram a day later. But the most telling sign of fallout wasn't what happened to them. It was how they turned on each other. Mom blamed Dad for handling it wrong. Dad blamed Lily for being careless. Lily blamed both of them for ruining her life. For the first time in my life, they were all fighting each other instead of uniting against me. Aunt Karen told me over coffee one morning that she'd overheard Mom sobbing to her. "I just wanted to help Lily get a start.
Karen's reply had been mercilessly simple. You destroyed one child to save another. That's not parenting. That's theft. It was strange hearing that from someone else. I'd spent so long wondering if I was crazy for feeling betrayed. Now other people were saying it out loud. The family mythology had cracked. I didn't push the legal side hard at first, but when the fraud investigation concluded, the results were decisive. The banks cleared my record completely. Greenhill Motors closed the fraudulent loan and sent a letter confirming that Mr. Nathan Ross is not liable for any debts incurred under his name between December 22nd and January 3rd. That piece of paper was my absolution. I framed it. Then came the civil case. The nonprofit's paralegal connected me to a young attorney named Samir, who specialized in financial disputes. He took one look at the file I'd built the documents, messages, receipts, and said, "You've done half my job already." We filed a small claim suit against my parents and Lily, jointly for the stolen savings and laptop value. It wasn't a massive amount, around $14,000 total. But it wasn't about the money. It was about record consequences. Court day was surreal. Seeing them there, seated at the defense table, was like watching a play about strangers who vaguely resembled people I used to know. Mom looked fragile. Dad, stiff. Lily, furious. They tried to argue it was a family misunderstanding that I'd consented verbally, but the judge didn't buy it. The paper trail was too clean. The judge's voice was dry when he said, "Families are not exempt from accountability under financial law." He ordered them to repay the full amount plus fees within 6 months. It was a quiet victory, but in its quietness lay all the satisfaction I needed. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Dad stopped me. For a moment, he looked less like the man who'd ruled every room he entered and more like a man who'd aged 10 years overnight. "Nathan," he said quietly, "you could have handled this privately." "I tried," I said. "You called it disrespect." He exhaled through his nose, a slow, broken sound. "You've shamed your own blood." "No," I replied. "You did that yourselves. I just turned on the lights." Mom didn't speak. She stared at the pavement, clutching her purse like it was the last thing she owned. Lily didn't meet my eyes at all. She just muttered something about everyone turning on her and walked to the parking lot alone. They did pay the judgment. Eventually, I got a cashier's check in the mail. No note, no apology. I deposited it without a word. By then, the damage was already done. Not to my credit, not to my finances, but to the illusion that they'd ever been my safety net. I wasn't their son anymore. I was a mirror they couldn't look into without flinching. Months passed, seasons changed, the story faded from local gossip to distant memory. My work flourished. I'd taken Mara's offer and joined her firm full-time as a project lead. I managed a small team of developers and learned how to balance empathy with authority, lessons my father never mastered. Eric and Anna became my family in the practical sense, the kind that brings soup when you're sick and remembers your birthday. I adopted a second cat. My apartment filled with small, intentional comforts. Books plant sunlight and silence. Every now and then, curiosity got the better of me, and I checked in quietly on my family. Dad had been demoted after the HR investigation. He still worked at the company, but without managerial authority. Mom started selling vintage clothes online under a pseudonym, her attempt, I guessed, to rebuild pride. Lily moved to a cheaper apartment 2 towns over, working as a receptionist somewhere. They weren't destitute, but the shine was gone. Their world had shrunk. One summer evening, almost a year after it all began, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized Mom's handwriting instantly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Nathan, I don't know how to start this. I've tried 100 times. Everything that happened was wrong. We went too far, and I can't change it. Your father doesn't talk about it, but I see what it's done to him. Lily barely visits anymore. I think we broke the family trying to hold it together. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know we see it now. I hope you're happy, Mom." I sat there for a long time reading it over and over. It didn't undo anything, but it was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever expected to get from her. I folded it carefully, placed it in the same folder as the court letter, and closed the drawer. The story was complete.
Months later, during the first real snowfall of the next winter, I passed by my parents' house. The Christmas decorations were still up, but dimmer. Half the lights burned out. The once grand wreath faded. Through the front window, I saw Dad sitting alone in his armchair, head in his hands, the TV flickering blue across his face. Mom walked past behind him carrying laundry. No laughter, no music, just the quiet hum of a family that had finally run out of illusions. I didn't go to the door. I just stood there a moment, snow gathering on my coat, remembering that morning a year ago when they told me they'd sold my laptop and emptied my savings for family. That moment had ended one version of me and started another. I turned to leave, feeling no hatred, no triumph, just a clean stillness. I had my own home now, my own family of choice, and a life they no longer had the power to touch. As I walked away, I glanced once more at the house where I'd grown up. For the first time, it didn't feel like home or prison. It just looked like a building that belonged to someone else. And with that, I whispered the only words that felt right, carried away by the cold wind as I stepped into the snow-lit street. You taught me everything I needed to know by showing me what not to.